Hi to everyone joining. My name is Amar. My pronouns are he, him. The voice you may have just heard is, of course, Daniel Kwan, who is teching and will occasionally chime in as the voice of God. Maybe we could just do some some introductions all around. Mariam, would you mind going ahead next?
Sure. I'm Mariam. I use they, them pronouns, and you can find me on Twitter at media_junkie. I am just waking up, so there's this entire. Anyways, that's where you can find me.
Ahmed, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Ahmed Al-Jabri. I translate D&D stuff into Arabic and try to explain Arabic stuff to English speakers.
Sorry, is that the azan I hear in the background?
Yeah, it's prayer time.
Fair enough. You are, of course, coming in from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I'm from Jeddah.
Very cool. Izza, please.
Hey, I'm Izza, known as Evil Clever Dog on Twitter and Instagram. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a cosplayer and set and costume designer, and I also play TTRPGs online. And yeah, I'm rearing to get into this book again.
And you're coming in from England, and so it's 5 o'clock for you, whereas Mariam and I are just waking up.
Yep.
Because it's Saturday and I woke up at like 11. That's just how I'm allowed to do. Adam Ali, please.
Hi, my name is Adam Ali. I'm a community organizer here in Toronto, and I also am one of the administrators of Breakout Con. By the way, little update about that. If you were hoping for Breakout 2020 to still continue, obviously it is not currently safe to do so, so we've decided to officially cancel it. If you haven't been updated yet, your tickets transfer directly over to Breakout 2021. And also, we're really excited to see you in March. Naturally, we're going to keep an eye on things just in case. But that's the last plugging I will do. My pronouns are he, him. You can find me on Twitter at WerewolfFeels, and I'm really excited to be here. Really excited.
We're really glad to have you. Unfortunately, Amr had to step away, so not that it's a one-to-one replacement here, but really glad to have you here as well.
I'm the new Amr.
I wanted to start this stream off with a similar beginning as the previous one, which is to read this tweet from DM Steve, who's one of the cast members of Dungeons and Asians, and he's been doing the read-through of Oriental Adventures with Daniel Kwan there. He says, Oriental Adventures, so you can sub in Al-Qadim here, is bad. It has a lot of problems and reinforces harmful stereotypes. But because I can connect the text to real-world racism, it doesn't mean that if you enjoy these books, you are a racist. It means you have the capacity to support Asian stories. And I wanted to sort of, just kind of use that as a framing device to talk about the way we're approaching this text. After the last stream, which, thank you so much. We got amazing feedback on it. But one of the pieces of feedback we wanted to address on air, and we had just a fantastic discussion in our group chat about it, is why aren't we more angry? I think that's probably the way to phrase that. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that because there was disagreement in the group as well, in this group here. Every single person here, I like immensely respect their perspective and diversity and diverse perspectives. And I wanted to give each of us an opportunity to discuss that on air. Does somebody want to jump in first?
Not me.
I can jump in here. So for myself, my views is that this is something that actually happened. We are not going to destroy it in a way that destroys all the fun that everybody had enjoyed through the times since it came out, because most people play it and they don't notice these things. And at the same time, we don't want to say, oh, you're not Arab, you're not Middle Eastern, you should not be doing these kind of fantasy things. No, we want to give you an encouragement, and we want to give you the tools, but the right tools, not Arabian Nights.
Which, as you pointed out last time, is French.
It's a horrible, horrible book.
It's a mishmash.
Even in Arabic, it's a horrible book.
It's a really interesting compilation. That's me being very diplomatic. And I was reading the translated, totally not for kids version in my high school library.
It's hilarious because it's kind of, it reminds me a lot of those anthologies that have been built long after the stories have been told for the first time, in that they don't necessarily go together. Their themes cross all the time, and
Like the Bible?
Yeah, pretty much. like a lot of things we hold sacred, sometimes we need to observe them with a critical eye. Otherwise, we're not doing them or ourselves a service.
Absolutely. And yeah, just, I know there's also a lot of conversation going on right now about D&D in general and how people feel about playing D&D 5e in general. And that maybe isn't like a discussion we have time for here, but like something I always think is really important is that even if you enjoy something, you can still be critical of it. And, you know, I don't necessarily enjoy this book, but I don't feel like I'm taking it away from other people to criticize it, especially because they probably have gone in without particular knowledge of the cultures it's supposed to be based on. And I think it's really important to look at works like this and to not only, you know, dunk on them, which is fun, but like we're also here to analyze and criticize and talk about why certain things we think are wrong with it, how it could be improved upon, whether it should just be taken out entirely, and for what reason that is. We're not just here to like get mad and dunk on it, as fun as that might be.
Yeah, like we're not trying to say your fun is wrong so much as be aware of who's at your table and why it makes them feel uncomfortable. And here's why, and here's how it can be improved upon.
And honestly, like, the more you take in sources from outside one point of view, you know, the more you listen to those folks of us who have, you know, lived in some of these places, or observe some of the mythology that have trickled down, you know, through things like Arabian Adventures or Oriental Adventures. I'm forgetting what the names of those things are because I keep on thinking of them as Al-Qadim, the bad one. But but the more you listen to voices outside of your own, the more interesting stories you'll find. I mean, I see all the time somebody's take on Twitter that people have run out of ideas, artists have run out of ideas. But the truth is, there's tons of them out there. It's just that a lot of the voices that have those ideas are not being listened to. So this is an opportunity to learn how to have even more fun, if you think about it.
Yeah.
And there's a generation of just amazing game designers, setting designers coming up right now who are producing games that are, you know, that are a little closer to the experience of actually playing in those stories than sort of the Orientalized Aladdin, I guess, version of, you know, whatever people think of as the Middle East. Which I think we find out also that Aladdin is maybe a story from China. Is that?
Yeah, it is definitely meant to originally have been set in China. I don't know if the story came from China, but there's this really interesting thing of like most of these stories have been altered so much that they're not even their original stories, and they have like these vast different origins and stuff. Yeah, Aladdin is set in China originally.
Yeah.
And actually, funnily enough, like just because we're on that topic, because here in the UK, like Panto is a huge thing, and Aladdin is one of the Pantos that's always done. And at the moment, there are a lot of conversations about like, should we be moving away from, you know, white people, an all-white cast of Aladdin with like turbans and all that kind of stuff. And some people have started to move towards instead doing Chinese costume and set dressing, which is equally as bad in a different way. Like, it's still bad to have white people playing Chinese people wearing Chinese clothes or like, you know, sort of fake stage versions of Chinese and Middle Eastern clothes.
Oof, like you missed the point.
Yeah. Or sometimes they mesh the two together, which I find very odd. But yeah, anyway, sorry, just thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Great to be here.
Yeah, and I mean, I was going to share sort of a bit of my personal experience with sort of anger, I guess, is I'm a 6 foot tall brown guy. I'm considered threatening without even sort of being that way. I've definitely noticed that since I've started wearing a mask because we're in a pandemic, outside, people give me a lot more space, which is great because you should keep your goddamn distance. But I'm wondering, is it because like you can't see my mouth anymore, or is it because you think I'm diseased? Like, which element of your bigotry is coming out here at the moment? And because I'm sort of, I'm in this body and in this embodiment, me being somewhat displeased is multiplied into like intense anger. So for me personally, anger is deeply politicized. It's deeply associated with sort of things that are considered undesirable, things that come off as very aggressive, even if I'm not trying to be, which is one of the reasons why I'm so gregarious and like friendly all the time, is to try to offset some of that sort of interpretation that people give it. So that's one of the reasons I'm not particularly I sort of don't get super angry just in general ever because of that. The other thing is, of course, I was schooled in philosophical charity, this concept of trying to be as charitable to the work and the authors as possible. That's not to say that I'm going to let them off any hooks here, but there is a certain amount of good intent that is assumed on part of the author, even if they're locked into a deeply Orientalist framework that they just can't think out of. That's my perspective. I don't speak for everybody here, of course, but wanted to share that too.
I mean, I will say I do not just share the perspective. That roughly is my perspective. I'm just shy of 6 foot myself, and I'm not exactly small, and I'm definitely brown enough to count. So it is very hard to let yourself have emotions when any sign of most emotions, honestly, can be considered a threat by those around you. It's just the reality of it.
And also having to pick your battles as well. Like for me, I mean, there's the thing of course, I will never know what the both of you go through. But there's also this thing of being a woman, or being born a woman, and having to not show anger and all of those other typical things. So you really have to choose where you show your anger, because you get few opportunities to do so.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because I was actually having this conversation with a friend yesterday that within conversations about topics related to this, I've had my perspective dismissed as, you're just a hysterical feminist, when I've barely been raising my voice, barely been actually getting that emotional, but just been like passionate about the topic I'm speaking about because it relates to me and my life. And yeah, it's very easy for people to presume threat on the part of like brown male people and presume sort of, over emotionality and dismiss the, intelligence or goodwill of like a woman who's perhaps getting like not even that emotional, frankly. So we just felt like it was worth mentioning that.
That statement of why aren't you more angry? Well, one, I mean, I understand that there's a certain amount of performative anger that can be quite, it can feel like it validates your own experience, especially if you've experienced a lot of frustration and anger and hurt. However, we wanted to talk about our particular perspectives about how we are relating to this work. Again, we are going to really, look at this very critically, which is going to happen right now when we look at the map. So we're starting with the legend first, actually, the map key. Shall we get into it? Unless there were any more thoughts before we...
Okay.
I think we covered everything we spoke about, yeah.
So we were discussing that we would probably just kind of read through the text and sort of discuss it as we went along. If anybody had particular comments that they wanted to make about a particular chunk of the text, then we would have somebody else read it so they could gather their thoughts. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can swap between reading as well, so it's not all on one person, I guess.
Yeah, I figured we could just, I don't know, every few paragraphs. How does that sound?
Yeah.
So
Do you want me
I'll-
to read the map key, or we skip to the next part?
Sure, yeah, please. Just or if there's any sort of thing that in particular jumps out to you in this map key.
I just want to pronounce the names as far as I think they are pronounced, because most of them are based on Arabic language.
Ooh, thank you.
So, of course, we have Zakhara, the region name. The accompanying map offers a sweeping view of Zakhara. Here are some locations of note. So the first one is Hudud or Huzuz. The Arabic word would be Hudud, means fortunes or luck.
Oh,
City
interesting.
of Delights. The heart and pulse of the empire, Huzuz lies near the Golden Gulf at the junction of major east-west and north-south trades. The city is ruled by the hereditary Grand Caliph and boasts the greatest palace in Zakhara. So I want to stop on this point about the Khalif, the title.
Yep.
I posted this tweet a couple of days ago. This is a very religious term. It's short for Khalifat Rasulillah, the successor of the Prophet of God. So I absolutely recommend anyone trying to do an Arabic title, don't use Khalif or Khalifa or Khalifat. Absolutely don't use that. This is a very religious term.
Sorry, go ahead.
To put in perspective, you don't see many of texts like these referencing popes. You know, it's got the same kind of power behind it.
Yeah, and I mean we discussed this last time too, that the text did seem to work hard to not sort of be too focused on on sort of an Islam analog.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to provide sort of alternate sort of a space for a pluralist sort of world, I guess, where there could be multiple religions and folk beliefs and so forth. So it is kind of a misstep to sort of do all that work of trying to avoid this thing and then just do this thing. What would be an alternate term? Sorry, go
I
ahead.
get it from their perspective. They think most people, they don't know what Khalifa means. This is the leader, so that's the title. They don't know what it actually means. But a proper would be like, for example, we have Amir or Amira. An equivalent to that word is prince, but it's actually just simply leader. Someone who leads the one who gives commands. And this is, in fact, is why the word admiral is originally from Arabic Amir al-Bahr, the prince or the leader of the sea.
Really?
Amir al-Bahr.
That's
admiral.
really interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
And interesting enough that as like in Urdu or in Hindi, well, Urdu specifically, Amir means rich or like someone who's noble or like old money.
Oh.
Do you want to finish off that little reading, Ahmed? And
Yes, most other rulers pay homage to the Grand Khalif, even if they pay him no other mind. The house of the lawgiver, a place of meditation and reverence, is located at the center of Huzuz. This one, it's written Hiyal, but I think it's probably Khiyal, city of intrigue, something that Khiyal, or something that seems, or illusion, or mystery.
Ooh.
I think this is what they intended, but this is for easier pronunciation. I will stick with Hiyal. City of intrigue, located further inland along north-south trading routes. Hiyal is Huzuz's dark twin, a gray, moody city which grew out of a swamp. So actually, Khiyal also means shadow. Within its smoke-filled backed rooms, dark pacts are made and broken. Hiyal's Sultana is crafty, scheming woman.
Yes, she is.
woman.
Yeah.
Because that's all a woman can be if she's a leader, of course.
How else would she be in power?
That's, you know what, I'd actually like to reference that for a second, because I've got some takes on this. I know you don't want my voice first, but for historical context, this is for historical context, usually like yes, women held soft power. Sometimes they didn't hold leadership positions of their own, but we know for a fact that they held the reins regardless. However, that does not mean they were always crafty and scheming. One of the most famous empresses of the Mughal Empire is Nur Jahan. And Nur Jahan was very much the woman in charge. She held the emperor's seal. She held court when he even wasn't around, and he would not hold court when she wasn't. There was no crafty or scheminess behind this, right? And the majority of the people who should be interacting with were men. So this is just like, it's reverting to a stereotype when there's a bunch of other more interesting choices you can take advantage of, because I'm assuming, that they're falling behind the image of a woman in power, scheming behind a veil or a fan.
Probably using her sexuality and femininity to manipulate men.
Yeah.
The mystique.
And
we have... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, it's fine. And also, I was just going to say that the very few references we have to these leaders right now are how we identify them to our players the moment we read this out.
Yeah.
So right now we have the Grand Caliph is not paid homage to, is paid homage to, but they pay him no other mind by other cities. The Sultana is a crafty, scheming woman. And if that's how you want to define your leaders, maybe you should reconsider.
So you actually, you touched on something interesting there, which is, well, there's two things going back to the Hudud City of Delights here. The first one is the idea of the City of Delights. Which does touch into this deeply Orientalist and often very stereotypical perspective on them as decadent and also fundamentally sort of toothless or powerless. Which is to say, the leader is the Grand Caliph is shown similarly in Aladdin, right? As being a bit out of it, and he's got this Grand Vizier who's Jafar is doing all of this machinations and stuff behind his back, and he's just kind of out of it, and like he's an old doddering king and so forth. And that really was a perspective that was used, or that has been used, to look at a lot of the sort of various empires and kingdoms and so forth when Europe became ascendant. So they looked at the Mughal king, the Mughal Raj. The Mughals was a dynasty. The Mughal were a Muslim dynasty that ruled over South Asia, or large chunks of South Asia, for a few hundred years, and then were superseded by the British in that way. And to be fair, like when the British and the Europeans showed up, that was an empire that was getting into decline. Similarly, towards the end of the Ottoman Empire in the early 1900s, it was again, a lot of Europeans orientalized those societies as being, horribly decadent, the City of Delights, whatever, hanging gardens and things like that, and then also where the leadership is fundamentally disconnected and corrupt, and therefore is this soft target. And so I do want to just kind of throw that in there. In the way that they're talking about the leaders here, it's very similar to the justifications used to colonize and or conquer these, invade and conquer these lands and cultures before too.
Yeah, it definitely, I feel, also plays into something I've seen quite a lot through looking at like Orientalist art, where the Orient, quote unquote, was seen as this was portrayed as this place where Europeans could go to also like participate in the decadence and go and like go to a harem and like eat the delicious fruit and all that kind of stuff. And it was really like, in a lot of Orientalist art, it is beautiful and it's colorful, but it is portraying that part of the world as this place that's sort of there for the pleasures of the European visitor. And then with the sort of the Sultana, the reason I kind of just sighed immediately is like, yeah, absolutely everything Adam Ali said, absolutely agree with. And even outside of the perspective of looking at this from as a setting based upon like the Middle East and everything.
Also, if you're going to
in general, sorry, my dog's doing something really weird behind me.
That's fine.
In general, I feel like this comes up again and again within sort of like historical fantasy stories and settings where women are seen as still being inherently physically weak, and so they have to use their craft and their sexuality and their schemingness to get by. You know, a character like Cersei Lannister, for example, is quite, I feel, quite a common way of trying to depict a woman in power in fantasy settings, and I find it very boring at this point. Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
So the other thing is the Grand Caliph is capitalized, whereas the Sultana, by the way, if you're going to talk about a person in power, capitalize them. Like the leader of Hial is not a dried fruit.
Yes, that's a very good point.
You never. Maybe that was the reference. Maybe she's not just a crafting, scheming woman, but a crafting, scheming raisin. I mean, I'd take that, honestly. That'd be interesting.
So I want to ask a question from the other half of this. So how would you recommend someone who wants to have a scheming woman without making her look so bad? How would you recommend to fix this one?
I think have variety. The issue is that this is the first sort of named, and maybe we'll find more. We've only gone down 2 in here. But the first sort of female character who's really been given like a name and an identity in this setting.
Not really a name and identity, literally just the leaders, the title for a feminized leader title.
Yeah, and immediately we've fallen into this stereotype. So like maybe there will be more, but frankly, from what I've seen already, I'm like I'm not getting my hopes up. But yeah, like for me, it comes from like diversity and variety, where when you have, you know, one female character or one POC character, they have to represent everything for that gender or that ethnicity. And no one character can ever do that. And you are more likely to fall into an unfortunate stereotype. But if you make the effort to have multiple characters of multiple genders and ethnicities, then a black character can be evil, or a woman can be evil without it portraying their entire gender or race as that. You know what I mean?
That's a really good point.
I'd also
can't be fixed locally. It has to be done sort of within the entire context.
If I might also add that, like, even in any context, even if the Grand Caliph was a woman, from, you know, what we've been told already, immediately breaking out the Sultan as a crafty, scheming woman would always be a problem, because that's not how our people view her, right? That's not how generally you want her to come across the moment you meet her in a game. Because if I have a crafty, scheming leader, I kind of want to screw my players over, right? I want them to believe in her. So why would I introduce her immediately like that?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's like, here is the leader, Sneaky McSneakerson.
And yeah, I feel like both of those descriptions.
Cruella de Vil, this is the leader of your country.
Like both those descriptions, I think a lot of this is written from the perspective of like the outsider looking in, as opposed to the people from this place talking about their own culture, which I think is very telling of the intentions of this book in general. Like it does seem to kind of come in with immediately like an Orientalist white saviory perspective, where it's describing from the outside in and talking about like how unusual, how different, and how weird this is, and sort of placing judgment upon it as well. There was actually a question from the audience. Are there any examples of women leaders in fantasy that just like do a good job and aren't really questioned? Which Daniel sort of flagged for us. I don't know if we want to go into that at all.
I don't know about fantasy, but the Queen of Sheba, from Islamic perspective, is a good example from our version of history. So if you can just take a look at her, she was leading southern Yemen. She was the ruler of the kingdom of Sheba. Her name was Balqis.
Which, let's not get into American gods.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yes.
So, Qudra, was it?
The next one, Qudra, meaning ability or power. City of Power, a major port on the Great Sea. Qudra has been heavily fortified over the years to fend off pirate, raids, and barbarians. Now it is a potent military and naval power, the best defended city in the Land of Fate. Qudra's emir is a patient, calm dwarf who was elected by the city's ruling Mamluk society. So first point, the dwarf is genderless. We don't know. But the one before it was a woman, and she's crafty scheming. But this one is just a dwarf. It doesn't matter what their gender is. Second thing, this is the mention. I think this is the first mention of Mamluk so far. And as far as I know, Mamluk are originally slaves who became free. And I am not fully sure of the history of that part, but I'm just curious why they would even bring this in the setting.
So this touches on something we did discuss in the first episode, but just as a quick reminder for the audience, a key feature, and this is the first chapter of Orientalism by Edward Said, which is a lot of where my sort of theoretical perspective on this is coming from, is literally about geography. That's why we're sort of focusing so heavily in this section, and we'll talk about the map, is the way that you talk about the geography of a place. You would think that that would be completely neutral and objective. It's like, no, the way you talk about the geography of a place says a lot about your intentions with that place. And something that we talked about last time in detail was this book really did, which is a common theme in Orientalist works, is it compressed immense diversity of many different peoples, many different cultures, many different ethnicities, many different political situations, so many different kingdoms and so forth, into sort of one generic Middle East. The caliphate was, as people have pointed out, a bit of it was politicized, I guess, for lack of a better term, which is to say, it was a bit like actually a lot to do with the papacy, actually. Who was the Holy Roman Emperor was a title that you fought in Europe, they fought for in order to become sort of like, the true sword of God or whatever the thing was. And that would move between kingdom to kingdom. And it was sort of somewhat similar to that. However, Sultana would be a more, I don't think it would have been an Ottoman thing. I think it would have been more of a, I'm trying to remember, Persian thing, maybe?
I mean, I think Sultan is Ottoman. I remember distinctly as being Ottoman.
Yeah, so it shows up in different cultures in slightly different ways. In the Ottoman Empire, the highest ranking person was the Sultan, and that's it. Yeah. One of their neighbors, whose name I can't remember, would often use Sultan as a rank for below the top leader. And then you also had different cultures that use Amir as the top person, right?
Seems Sultan is Turkish of origin.
Yeah,
which is also used a lot in the Mughal Empire as well, because it's traced to the Turks.
The Mughal dynasty came from a similar origin. So they really seem to be sort of, again, mixing up a bunch of different cultures and a bunch of different historical periods and stuff in order to use different terms from different times for signifying leadership. So the Mamluks, I'm pretty sure, indeed was a slave rebellion that took over in, who remembers that?
It's a good question.
The internet remembers that.
So I just a quick thing about the word Sultan. So it came from the Turks, which originally took it from Arabic and just changed it a little bit to become what it is today.
Yeah.
While we're on the terminology for leaders, it says Kudra's Emir is a patient calm dwarf. Is Emir like a derivative of Amir or a different
it's the spelling.
So here's male, I think, then.
I think, what is it called? Transliteration is when you just spell it the way you hear it.
Right.
Which leads to
so it's a male.
Yeah, multiple different
not Emir.
Actually, on the subject of pronouns and assumptions of gender, I do have something interesting. So I was really bored not last stream, but after last stream, like a day later, I was really bored for some reason, and I decided, okay, so this he, him, why stick to the male gender so thoroughly, right? It's not just about the time period. Is there like a note about it? And then I decided to look into this, and then I looked into this is how my brain works. And then I looked into the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook, the revised edition. And they actually have a note about pronouns on the first page. Right after the table of contents, the second page after the table of contents, page 9. It's very small, so I don't think there's any worth really putting it up on Zoom, but I will quickly go say it. The male pronoun, he, him, his, is used exclusively throughout the AD&D game rules. We hope this won't be construed by anyone to be an attempt to exclude females from the game or imply their exclusion. Centuries of use have neutered the male pronoun. In written material, it is clear, concise, and familiar. Nothing else is. And the reason why I wanted to point that out is that this isn't just like they're mostly assuming their vast majority of players are male. When the gender isn't stated, because the male gender is neutral in how they're describing things, the assumption is you will get it right off the bat that this dwarf, no, that's a male dwarf, even if you don't know the root of the word emir or emira. And same with the Grand Caliph or any other leader that we're going to talk about.
Except Sultana is immediately gendered.
Feminine.
And also...
It doesn't matter. Oh, go ahead.
I know
also, just, I feel like we both had a face at the exact same moment. It's like male, men, and then immediately refers to the other binary female.
Use they.
Yeah, it's so easy. Just they.
Oh, I absolutely agree. But I will point out that Sultana is a crafty, scheming woman. Even though the feminine version of Sultan was there, they still felt the need to put woman in to make it very clear. Don't assume this guy, this person is a male, because the assumption is there.
This reminds me actually of an article I read a long time ago, and it was about some video game or something, but they were basically, the basic premise of it was, male is neutral, female is gendered, white is neutral, black, brown is a race or an ethnicity, wherein the dominant group within whatever group you're talking about, whether it's like genders or sexualities or ethnicities, becomes neutral. So male is neutral, but women's studies is gender studies, for example. So you are othering the minority group constantly and presuming that the dominant group is neutral and universal.
And it's the default, and it's so the default has been made invisible even. Yeah. And now to talk about it is to, really rock the boat and be like,
it's why white people get annoyed when you call them white. It's why cis people get annoyed when you call them cis, because they are having their gender or ethnicity like told to them, which they're not used to having. Whereas women and people of color and gay people and trans people are used to having to use that prescriptive term to describe themselves.
Which kind of segues into the whole calm dwarf. So it's like, wait, so dwarfs are not calm? Like, it's one of those things when you put, oh gosh, I'm very bad with what, I think adjective. Yes, adjective. When an adjective is suddenly put to a race, and then it's sort of like, wait, why are you pointing this out?
I don't think that's an issue, because you want to give a description of the character.
I think that
his demeanor.
But they haven't given him a name. I think if they gave him a name and maybe a physical description as well, and said, this dwarf named X is looks like Y and has this demeanor, it wouldn't feel like it was placing that descriptor on the race.
The other thing is that the other two leaders that have been described right now have no race, whereas this one is. Actually,
I think this one, because the standard for D&D up till now,
still the default in
5e,
D&D.
is that the man and woman is exclusive to humans, while other races have male and female.
Which is another can of worms, honestly. What? So, other humanoid races that are non-human races, there's suddenly male and female, versus a man and a woman can only be human, whereas there's nothing in man or woman that suggests it's only limited to human, especially when there are other humanoid races that are there, like dwarves, elves, orcs, and all that stuff. And it's another sort of in language that that othering that exists by essentially making them male female, like bioessentialism, essentially.
I agree. I think that it should be standard. Don't go to male, female versus man, woman. I don't know why they decided to do this. It was weird reading it back then, and still weird thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's like a biology lesson.
Yeah.
Okay, I did look up the Mamluks, and I was correct. It is mostly an Egyptian phenomenon. The Mamluks was a knightly class, but they occasionally were able to become the sort of sultans of of the mainly Egyptian and Syria, and what is now Egypt and Syria, kind of that region.
That's the kingdoms, not the word itself.
Sorry, run that by me again.
So the Mamluk kingdoms, when they those are people who are either descendant or used to be slaves and free and made their own nations.
Yes.
But the word Mamluk itself is anyone who is a slave or used to be a slave or descended from a slave.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. So yeah, which again, just sort of going back to what I was talking about before, is like, yeah, that was sort of that the slave phenomena was rampant in historical, middle world area, but it's often compressed down in when you're talking sort of, like the Mamluks as a sort of knightly class, as a class of knights, it does literally mean slaves, and they were enslaved knights, but they were able to accumulate some power in what is now Egypt during sort of the Middle Ages. And it sounds like that's what's happening here, considering they're these cities ruling Mamluk societies.
See, the main difference between a normal slave and a Mamluk is that Mamluks are allowed to carry weapons and fight.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
This is a major difference. So they are knights, just warriors,
And
right?
Like gladiators.
Likely why they decide to add them into Qudra.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, but that's a different phenomena than the Ottomans, which had a different. They had sort of the Janissaries were more their shock troops anyway. Though they also had enslaved warriors. Does somebody else want to read the next little bit? I can do that if you like.
Sure.
I will take over.
Yeah.
Pantheist League, a collection of city-states bordering the Golden Gulf and the Crowded Sea. The Pantheist League is a religious hierarchy controlled by moralist factions. Moralists are described in Chapter 3. Well, that'll be interesting when we get to it. Members of this league tolerate all who recognize and worship Kor, Najm. Sorry, do you want to say these names, Ahmed?
Kor, Najm, Hajama, Silan, and Johar.
A local deity named Johar. Do you have translations handy, or they're just...
So Kor, I'm not sure where is it from. Najm is the star.
Okay.
Hajama is probably protection. It's also a tradition where you suck blood from around the neck and the head.
I mean, okay. I know, but I would kill if there was a vampire god. I'd be so.
I'm pretty sure it's they intended hijama as in protection, not hijama the blood sucking. Silan, I'm not sure, but Johar means gem or jewel. Johara, gem or jewels. Yeah.
Fascinating.
That's really interesting because they're like Johars, which is also like a Hindu family name, means jewelers. So it's really interesting that there's all these like linguistic things. Like I'm not a linguist, but somehow I keep talking about all these things because I have a lot of friends and just like it's very fascinating. So I think that's really cool that that's what it means.
I did a deep dive into the Proto-Indo-European language. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but that's supposed to be the ancestor language to pretty much all sort of South Asian, Middle World, and European languages. And the sort of amount of similarities you find are amazing. So like namaz, which is the word for the Muslim prayer, is related to namaste, which is kind of a greeting in Hindu culture. So absolutely interesting that there does seem to have been an ancient root, a single ancient root for both those languages. And then anyway, I'm not going to go into it, but it was a nice little deep dive of Wikipedia for an afternoon. Okay, so to continue on, people who worship other gods are shunned or persecuted. The pantheists pay lip service to the City of Delights as the home of the lawgiver and the Grand Caliph, but their government remains completely independent. Anything there?
I mean, the shunned and persecuted thing. that's very familiar, but I'm like, it could just be a thing that is tossed in there. I don't find that often described to D&D cities, but I'm not familiar with AD&D. For all I know, it could be very common, right? It's definitely thought of as, cultures from the East. The East. I always get them confused. Are more likely to be cruel to those who are different than them in the context of history, and even in the context of today, which, yes, is very ironic. But, that could come from that. It could just be like a small fact, a small factoid because they wanted space. I'm willing to be nice.
Well, I don't want to be an apologist for the book, but I do appreciate that they said, oh, there's a zone where this is the case, rather than being, oh yeah, the entire setting, you are either this religion or this religion, and the two will fight each other to death. So it's like, okay, they wanted to have a space of religious intolerance. But as you pointed out, that's an intensely Orientalist perspective, because I don't think I've come across that in D&D anywhere else. It seems like, D&D, the standard D&D Forgotten Realms setting is, enlightened pluralism and toleration and of all religions and cultures and so forth. Whereas this is like, okay, there's a place where this is, you're specifically intolerant, which, as you pointed out, is a charge often leveled against other cultures who aren't as enlightened as ours.
Yeah, I think we did touch on this last time, and it's definitely something that I'm certain will come up again and again, where they seem to be determined to paint this setting as like uniquely violent and cruel and harsh to certain people, in a way that I don't feel like they do with like Faerun and other settings. And it is problematic that they've chosen the setting based on like Middle Eastern cultures to do that with, because it plays into some really harmful stereotypes.
Is that foreshadowing because you read ahead?
It's also, we talked about it last time as well, but yes, also yes.
I just want to point out something. Like, there is an image about Arab history that being polytheists, as in worshiping, especially worshiping idols. So I want to clarify one thing. This was not the entire history of Arab culture. Before the recent history before Islam, this was current and this was spread. But before that time, the Arabs were either monotheistics. They believed that there is some God out there, whether through Semitic religion from Jews or Christian, or they were just atheists. Whatever greater power is time. And this idea of polytheism was very recent to Arab culture, and it only came a few generations before Islam came.
Oh, fascinating! I didn't know that. Another early religion that I always found fascinating is Zoroastrianism. It's unclear how far that spread from Persia, but it sort of is an interesting historical religion. I mean, obviously there are current Zoroastrians, so I'm not trying to dismiss their experience, but in the history of the way religions developed, for me, I've been very interested in them as well. So I didn't know about that. That the non-polytheistic or anti-idol worship was only a few generations before the time of. And
we also have the name of the person who started it. His name is Amr ibn Lahi.
Really? I'm gonna have to look that up. Thank you.
Yeah.
High desert. The land across from Hiyal and Hudud rises to a. Sorry, was it Iyal?
Hiyal.
Hiyal. Okay. Hiyal.
We'll stick with the simple, easy to pronounce English one.
Fair enough. The land across from Hiyal and Hudud rises to a high windswept plateau, dotted by oases and the deep wadis, the seasonal streams. Here, the great nomadic tribes of Sahara raise their herds and raid their neighbors.
I just want to say one thing about wadis. Wadi is singular. You don't add an S to it to make it plural. This is an Arabic word.
Right. It's like you don't say. Yeah.
If you want to go ahead, I want to make a plural of it. Just if you're using Arabic word, just use the Arabic plural for it.
Right.
Which is Vidian. And that's it. I'm not going to say anything else.
That is a fair point. Yep.
That's fair. That's actually a really good point, because if you're going to use, they had a language consultant. Let's remind people of this.
Yeah.
Right in the special thanks section. How did something like this slip by? And I also do question why the city so far have been named in Arabic, but the desert and the next one, spoiler alert, are not. Because again, like as Isa said before, this is it really does feel like it's from a Westerner's point. It's like a tourist guide to Sahara.
Yeah.
So the one other thing I'm going to point out, sort of to add to that, is that even with a consultant doesn't necessarily have can't influence what actually gets printed, because they can consult, but it is up to the writer to take their advice or completely ignore it.
And then the editor as well.
Yeah, and we can't ascertain what actually happened, but those are the things that real life actually happens. So we can't put the blame or like sort of be like, hey, how did you miss this? Because they could have pointed it out.
And I think they made a choice because it's just easier.
Yeah.
Thank you for that insider's perspective on the process. I think that's really important too. Shall I continue reading?
Yeah.
Haunted lands. The second great desert of Sahara. This region once held a powerful collection of warring city-states, petty nations, and proud nomadic tribes. All disappeared many centuries ago, leaving their cities in ruins. According to one legend, the pride of a single ruler brought about the downfall of everyone. Whatever the reason, nearly all of the haunted lands have been abandoned by men. Except for the outskirts, this region now belongs to genies and the creatures of the wilderness.
I choose to believe there's also just a bunch of women living there.
And non-binary.
Yeah.
That's where you can find them all. They're all just
women in the NBs. Yeah, the women in the NBs are just chilling here.
Hashtag feminist compound.
Rings. No man can kill me all over again.
So on one hand, for those who do not know my day-to-day job before all this started, I was a tour guide who told ghost stories for a living. And history. Ghost stories and history. Honestly, I'm more of a history buff, so I tell more history. So this is like, in a sense, immediately fascinating. I do kind of want to tell the story. On another sense, probably saved until we actually see the map, truth be told. But we'll get to that later. This doesn't seem like it seems like a plot hook. But I don't feel like it's going to be a plot hook that's referenced again. I don't know why I have that feeling. I'm honest, I haven't read that far. But it does feel like it. It feels like it's just, a harsh lesson, and if you really want your PCs to face some genies, send them there. And that kind of makes me sad, because Eberron really handled their Mournlands. They made it a very central part of their setting. And I kind of hope that once we get to the Haunted Lands, later on in the book, they're treated with that same sort of fascination, because that is a great like tool for GMs to not only add their own scenarios, but also, play around with parts of mythology that the players might not even see before.
I do think in better hands, this could genuinely be quite an interesting concept.
Mm-hmm.
Next,
it also reflects our idea, the Arab and Bedouin ideas. Where do genies live? And this kind of fits the niche that we believe where they would live in.
Sorry, can you expand on that? Where do genies live?
Genies usually live wherever empty, badlands, places which are no longer people live in, like ruins. There used to be cities, but no longer anymore. All these descriptions fit where we, as Arabs here, think genies would live. Jinn, not genies. Jinn specifically.
To jump on that point, because I'm also a person who's studied a lot about jinn. I know. I'm a walking stereotype. But I was actually told when I was growing up, and since then, that ghosts don't actually exist. It's the jinn taking the faces of your past loved ones to trick you. And I don't know if that's common or not, but like, to call it the Haunted Lands and not mention ghosts makes me think they might have heard the same story, which also is, again, very intriguing. Like, part of me is hoping that when Dungeons and the Asians start up, there's going to be a genie who's just haunting Walid for no reason. Go for that.
And I want to kind of add
Daniel, are
to
you
that.
listening?
I want to add to that as well. Like a similar thing that my mom would do was as soon as like the sun would set, she'd light one light in the house, at least one, because you don't want to attract jinn.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's
And we play the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah at home when we were kids. If the house is empty, we play Quran. Just a record playing in the background.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
So what I'm interested in is the way that the sort of jinn figure into the folklore of at least my experience in Pakistan anyway, or growing up in Pakistani as in that culture was at night trees were thought to hold genies as well. I don't know if that's something that exists exists in sort of like the Middle East or Middle World or anything like that, whether that's specific to my family. But yeah, it's interesting to see how the sort of these ideas sort of shift across geography too.
I mean, the truth is, according to a lot of the papers I've read, and according to what I've learned over the years, the stories about the jinn are wide and varied. What little we know, what little is consistent amongst cultures, is that they have the same choice abilities as us. Like they're not good or evil.
Yep.
They're just people. And I've always found that very fascinating. I actually have written a playbook for the jinn for Urban Shadows based upon that concept. I'm forgetting that I'm doing this live. I'm not doing that.
Did you just break your NDA? Is that where we are now?
No, it's not an NDA. This is like a homebrew thing, but God help me. I don't want to be held accountable. Like, where is it?
You've said it on the internet now, so
In Islamic culture, see the segue here. In Islamic culture, at least as far as I know, we don't have devils per se.
Mm-hmm.
We have jinn, and Satan in our version of in Islam is a jinn who was in high status and turned bad.
Yep. And
he is the leader of all the bad jinns.
Yeah, just like us, there can be some terrible ones out there, and there can be some wonderful ones.
We have stories from elderlies here, like they would say, I thought you woke me up at the night, and they say, oh, that wasn't you, that was a jinn appearing as you, and help me wake up and go pray.
So poets in pre-Islamic folklore, there was this thing called the shayir, and the shayir were people who were said to be touched or who actively spoke with jinn. Right? Because the jinn, their nature is that they were made before us. We are clay, they are not. They're made of fire. And that relationship's, I don't know if it's been sour, but it feels like it has. And they rarely interact with humanity because of it. So for a jinn to take interest in you and in a positive manner, you know, it really does mean something. And some great artists have attributed, you know, some of their inspiration to you know, speaking to the jinn.
Usually it's not them attributing, it's people accusing them.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to be nice about it. I've heard some in referencing to themselves, but you're right.
There are a lot of stories of people communicating and even marrying jinn and having kids with jinn.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And a lot of the sort of, I guess, folklore that my mom would tell me is about doing things that attract the good jinn and repel the bad jinn. Like a lot of that is based on that concept itself of like, including the whole putting a light on after dark and all those other things.
Someone, Peter just brought up the Ganassi, and I'd rather move on.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So I did want to mention. Well, I'll do it in a minute. Afyal. Do we have a translation on that?
Elephants.
Oh, fun. A number of small nations are scattered throughout the crowded sea. Of the 4 major islands, however, only Afyal is ruled by a common government. Afyal's Padishah seeks to extend his power by extending colonies on nearby islands. Afial is a typical island nation. It has a rich, mostly unexplored hinterland and a thriving coastal trade. It also has a very strict social system or caste system.
This, but Disha is not an Arab thing, so we jumped into another culture now.
Persian.
Persian.
Disha is Persian. Yeah.
Yep. But yeah, I mean, so clearly they did some mix and matching here too. I mean, obviously these weren't all supposed to be analogs, direct analogs for historical time periods or whatever, but they really did do a mishmash here.
It's like cultural Mad Libs, yo.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they did not call this Arabian Adventures, we would have less problems so far.
Yeah, that's the problem, really. There was this. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing they did with Oriental Adventures, except in Oriental Adventures, they're kind of saying like, all of like this book is all of the Orient, quote unquote, because I hate that term, but really most of it is like Japan. And then in this book, they're saying like, this is all of Arabia, but it's like from so many other cultures.
That are not Arabs.
But it still has the same effect of like basically treating those cultures as interchangeable.
It also has it also just doesn't make much sense from a geographic point of view. A lot of these cities, we'll get to the map later, but a lot of these cities are built so close together that their cultures would really influence each other to the point they would not necessarily have separate words. So it's possible, for example, that the Caliph is a religious leader as well as I still am uncomfortable with that word being used, but it's possible they meant to use him as a pope. But Hiyal and Qudra, their two leaders should probably have the same name, the same title, because they're close enough together on the same continent that they likely either broke off or are related to one another. So it like the Padishah, I don't mind too much because it's in an island nation, so it's quite possibly the culture evolved separately before trade. But the others, it doesn't seem likely considering they all speak the same language, Midani. Yeah.
Right.
That's not like an Orientalist thing. That's just a nerd thing.
Fair. Shall we finally turn to the map?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
You're missing one bit,
Please.
if I may. Afial is a typical island nation. It has a rich, mostly unexplored hinterland and a thriving coastal trade. It also has, you know what? I am losing it, and I'm ashamed. My apologies.
It's okay. It's a Saturday afternoon.
Is it?
Yeah, I know. What day is it anymore? What is time? I've decided it's perpetually Tuesday.
It's so oddly specific.
Well, yeah, but that's what it feels like, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like, I mean, the weekend is long ago. That was the before times, 4 months ago. That like, the kind of rush that you get coming back on Monday, you're like, oh, there's all this stuff I need to take care of from the weekend, from last week, whatever, that like Monday's kind of got a rush. But Tuesday is when you hit that like, oh crap, the week is really just beginning.
Yeah.
Pre-hump.
Yeah, but you're not even, it's exactly pre-hump, right? So it's not even like, it's not a Thursday or a Friday. It's not like, oh, it's the weekend. So it's just, I've decided that pandemic is perpetually Tuesday.
I totally see your reasoning. I buy this.
Yeah.
Sure.
So the map, if you wouldn't mind, Daniel, if you could put up the, okay, it's a little zoomed in, so I think we'll probably have to take this in quarters, maybe. Shall we start at the top left, if everybody's got the map up?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, just let me know where you want me to zoom in on the map.
Okay, so start at the top left quarter, I guess, and then we might zoom into sort of specific things if anybody's. So what's standing out to people here?
Most of the cities mentioned seem to be all on the northern coast, or it feels like it anyway.
Right.
It's reasonable. It's a desert. That's where you're gonna live.
Damn, the haunted lands are huge.
That was going to be my point. Don't forget obviously you probably haven't, but just in case the chat has, the haunted lands are full of dead civilizations and dead villages. The dead villages almost make up more space than the living ones.
Yeah.
And
This is a post-apocalyptic land, apparently.
I kind of like that because in our lore, is that the Arabian Peninsula at some point is supposed to be a lavish green land before it turned into an old desert.
I mean, it was. So in the ancient Egypt, probably not the right place for it, but in the ancient Egypt days, a lot of the places that we now see is covered by desert, including a lot of Arabia and a lot of the area around the Nile, were indeed not desert in the way we see them. They were full of really rich, vibrant land. So that's less of a tale and more of just a remembering of history told through an oral lens.
I'd also like to point out that this is kind of similar to how I think general D&D-esque places are thought of like settlements sort of dotted around wilderness as a whole, because that makes it easier to sort of like for adventurers to not have to maybe consider, yes, Oreo. Sorry, I don't know if you can pick up my cat.
Yeah, I hear it.
Yeah, so it sort of goes into this whole adventuring sort of core of D&D, where you don't have to consider the sort of like urban settlements and huge cities and everything. And it's like in between rest stops, the rest is like discovery.
Yeah, for the foreigner to come in, as we discussed. Yeah.
Whereas in reality, like usually farmlands are inhabited, like in between major cities or towns or whatever, there are farmlands, there are people exist. They're just not in a large density.
Well, from a map making perspective, first of all, the major cities has to be near sources of water. So this explains why, if you look at the map carefully, it's all near rivers. Even if it's next to the sea, it's usually next to a river as well. Secondly, the farmlands and all these things, they're usually so dotted and unimportant for the cartographer to point out. They are usually just neglected and assumed they're farmlands. If you have a green badge somewhere, probably there are farmlands near this body of water. You don't need to mention every village and every town.
So I just went through the map quickly, looking at all of these, and stop me if this is sort of just not consistent with D&D. But where are the city of like learning? Where's the city? Where's the great city of scholars?
Yeah, I'm seeing like the city of riches and the city of coins and.
Yeah, I mean, something like this is a bugaboo of mine, which is people look at sort of people ignore the intellectual history of the sort of that whole part of the world, especially considering that after the Greece and the Roman Empire fell, a lot of that philosophical work and the mathematical work continued on in these regions. Like where's you've got the City of Delights. Baghdad was one of the first cities to reach over 1 million people, and was the center of learning. The people sort of came from all over the world to learn from there. Like so, I don't know. Again, this is
there is a city of intrigue and a city of searching, which I guess could be
Qadib city.
Yeah, Qadib, the city of wands. It's packed with universities, according to one of our commenters. Thank you, Dan Dillon. I think the point you're trying to, correct me if I'm wrong, but the point that's knowledge isn't known as the subtitle of any of these things, right? Or learning, which is, it does hit wrong, because one of like, Al-Azhar is one of the first university, is the first actually university style building in the world. It's not the first university, because that's a name only given 2 places on the European continent, because it was a European word, but it was the first big place, dedicated place of learning of that size. And it was not in Europe. It was it is one of the cultures being drawn from here. Instead, they want to make sure that we have things like the City of Delights and the City of Multitudes, whatever that means, and the City of Wonders and Spires, and the City Most Sinister. Wish I hadn't read that. Because all of these are more designed to illustrate what the author wants us to think when we look at these cities. when you have a map like this in front of players, this is what they get, and maybe a little blurb, and they are drawn to, I want to play an intriguing game. I'm going to go to the City of Secrets, or I want to learn about fighting. Let's go to the City of Soldiers.
Right.
You know, unless the GM gives them a leeway into another one, if you place a map in front of them, the fact that none of these have knowledge, or none of these have, the places of learning stated right there on the map, it is concerning.
Yeah.
It is concerning.
Because I vaguely recall there being cities dedicated to like, this is where the wizards learn in sort of the other settings. I might be mistaken about that though.
But also tying learning only with magic, like associating it with magic such as wands, that also sort of
mystifies it.
And
I
also
think
makes
it's
it that
related to the
basically
naming, because I'm reading the names and I'm seeing they're just writing the name in English below it.
To
like
be fair,
Qadim is rod or staff, and the next to it is Khafaya, which is secrets. Utaqa is free men, like they were slaves and they were freed. Muluk, kings, it's just translation of the name.
Yeah, to be fair, I think that's the thing. I think they said, I want a city of like staves or wands. I want a city of magic. So they wrote that down. And then they looked for translations and then came up with Qadim.
Right.
So they could have started with, I want a city of knowledge. And they would have ended up with a different word. The city would be named different from the top. Because the people who wrote this did speak English primarily.
Right. And I mean, to some degree, maybe somebody reading this would pick up an Arabic word or two if it was a direct translation.
It's still just the one thing is that it would have been nice to have cities that were sort of known for learning and university that were not paired simultaneously with magic, because then it basically says anyone who is not pursuing magic doesn't there's no book learnings if it isn't related to magic.
Well,
so
I mean,
no, like ingenuity.
A counterpoint here. Isn't in these settings usually science is magic?
Right, like in the standard D&D setting, that's the case as well. Right.
You also know that Huzuz has a place called the Lorebringer, if that. So.
Yeah, but that's also the other thing where book learnings also aren't just tied to science or magic. Like there's lots of other types of book learning.
That's a good point.
There was a huge amount of like math study going on in the days of many of these empires. And I don't think your average like D&D style wizard wants to sit around and talk about math all day. Seems like a bit much.
Really? Playing where we do math, like playing a game where we do math?
So let's talk about in-game math. Pull out your in-game spreadsheets, in-game players. Should we go to the top right corner?
Sure, one sec. Before we leave, Daniel Kwan raised this point. Are wands a thing in kind of whatever this general region part of the world magical systems? Or is that like more a Wicca Western thing that they're like, oh, it's magic?
Staffs, yes. Wands, no.
Okay.
Because the closest thing we have in our minds to an image of a wizard or somebody who practices magic would be the wizards of Pharaoh. In the Islamic story of Moses, when the wizards, they throw their staffs and they turned it to illusions of snakes. So we don't have any image of a Western wand kind of thing. It's always a staff.
Right.
There's a very fun Oriental Adventures reference in there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Fun fact: if you want to look up this guy named John Dee, he is kind of the prototype for all of the Western ideas of what a wizard looks like. He's like a super old dude with like a big hooked nose, and like would wear robes and stuff. And he was sort of very learned for his day. He was also kind of one of the last figures that is kind of he straddles both the world of like alchemy and magic and sort of what we consider modern science. So he's an interesting figure sort of historically that way. Okay, so yeah, top right corner, please, or top right quarter, please, Daniel.
Already done. Did you know that John Dee's signature apparently was also 007?
It was actually a pair of
What?
glasses. It was a pair of glasses with a 7 on it. And then, yeah.
The first James Bond, a spy, an occultist, a magician, a scholar.
Totally.
Just nifty.
He's a super interesting person. If somebody wants to look him up, like he's a super interesting person. Okay, so or figure, I should say. Okay, so what do we see here at the top right? World Pillar Mountains.
Land of the Yak Men.
Do we have a translation on that? Because they don't say anything about
It says Jabal al-Aqbas, at least of what I can read.
I can't read it probably. Al-Aqbas. Al-Aqbas. What's Al-Aqbas? I'm not sure. World Pillar.
That might be Aqbasal or Aqbasi. I think there's a letter after that too.
No, it's the bracket.
Oh, it's a bracket. Okay.
Yeah. Do you think it? Are you sure it's not Jabal al-Akbar? Because that might be an R.
It's possible that the
Great
font's
Mountains?
really bad.
Just a general note about stuff like this. The fonts are always so bloody hard to read because they want to make them look ethnic.
Yeah, this is
Oh,
like
yeah.
our equivalent of the wonton font thing. I don't know if it has a name or not, but it's like that. It's basically that equivalency for like anything set in the Middle East or anything.
How did I miss
it's
talking
Jibal
about that?
al-Aqbas, but I have no idea what it means.
It
How
could
did I
have
miss
been
talking about that terrible font?
It could be a translation typo or error where it's like they took one word and then while they were writing it, they'd had a typo and then the typo just stayed.
Possibly.
So, foreigners see.
The Behar al-Jami. My Arabic is a bit rusty, despite the fact I do pray in it. Is there a good translation for that? Does that just mean foreigner see?
Yeah, it's Bahr al-Ajami, the foreigners.
Yeah. So.
Singular.
Ooh, Ghost Mountains. Sorry.
So we've got the haunted lands with the ghost mountains inside it. Like,
I wonder what we could find there.
Jinn.
Oh, so speaking of, shall we switch to the bottom left order?
I was just about to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting that they seem to just. I don't know if they're using the terms to mean two different things, but they use both the term genie and the term jinn or jinni.
So, yeah, as Mariam pointed out, I think last stream, or maybe it was on Unfiltered and Utopia, or maybe in 5e specifically, we know this for a fact, there are actually two different monsters. And the reason why this is because the jinn are just one type of genie in 5e, and in D&D in general. There are four types because they're elementals. The jinn are the elementals of wind. The ifrit are the elementals of fire. The marids are the elementals of
Water.
water. Yeah.
And Dao, I think, are
Earth. Yeah.
Earth.
Yeah,
So,
I just wasn't sure if within this context they were doing that differently, basically.
I don't think
Yeah.
so. Yeah. I think. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Anything else stand out to people?
I mean, I kind of want to go to the Steaming Isles.
That's where the saunas are.
The archipelago of the Great Crab. Who's the Great Crab?
I think that's a
So
Rokugan reference. I think you can find the Crab Clan there, but I'm not 100% sure.
Oh, great. Mix all the Orient things together.
The Crab Clan is definitely my favorite of the clans. It's the least problematic of them.
May, don't get me started on the Unicorn Clan. We'll be
You
here a
can
week.
find them in Zakara, which is not where the rest of them are.
There's a chain of islands at the utmost bottom.
Yeah,
That
across
is
the bottom.
worst.
Islands
written-
of the utter south.
Please don't do this if you're making a map. Just put the words next to each other in a place where people can read them, please.
Write it twice.
Yeah.
We
Or
won't
put like a line showing how far it
Nobody's
expands or
gonna name them
something.
all in one name. So it's gonna be the utter south something, the other south something
Yeah.
else. They're gonna be grouped together in different names.
Yeah.
I feel like someone just got so exasperated. Like, I don't know what I'm going to call this? Fine, it's the utter south.
We need to fill in the bottom of the map. We ordered such a large piece of paper.
Thank you for showing that on the stream, Daniel. Yeah, it's not great.
There's also just above that the Wild Isle.
Yep. So this is now the bottom right quarter, I think.
Yeah.
This is the party isle.
And then
this
the
is
Isle
where
of
you find
War.
Harab. Yeah, that's
Harab.
interesting. Harab.
The Isle of War. So I'm very interested to know like why it's called that. Is there a perpetual war there?
Probably not.
There's also an isle and city of the elephant.
Yes,
Yes.
Afyal is, as we
Afyal.
discussed before,
Afyal.
is
Oh, that's the one with the Taj Mahal.
Yeah.
Ya Allah.
Oh, jeez.
What?
I didn't even catch that.
Yeah, like
Oh.
all of the little icons are very iconic Islamic architecture.
Right.
Just painted differently.
Yeah,
This is a pink Taj Mahal.
recolored.
Wouldn't it?
Well, so Hudud has the Hagia Sophia,
I did not notice that.
or the Hagia Sophia, sorry.
Yeah, now that you say it, I don't know the names of all of them, but I recognize these photos. Like they're just
Yeah.
traced from photos.
That's a
Okay.
okay.
Is a lot like the Al-Quds in Jerusalem. Masjid al-Sakhra.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure you could just go around looking for Islamic landmarks worldwide and you'll find these
Yeah.
pictures related to them.
Yeah.
Right.
I-
Which again, a lot of them are outside of Arabia.
Yeah.
I mean, that it's gonna like. I'm pretty sure that this entire book is just going to be completely a mishmash of like all kinds of parts of Asia.
Well, this
Yeah.
is a nice
Has
one.
been established.
As an outsider, I'm curious about the City of Confessions.
Mm-hmm.
What is the
That's the
translation
one-
of that? That's
It's i'tiraf, confession.
okay.
That's the one that looks like. I think that's the blue. I think that's
The
the mosque in
blue.
Jerusalem.
No, that's
No,
that's
Taraf.
Qudra.
Oh, right.
It's south of Huzuz, 2 cities south of Huzuz.
Okay. Oh,
I'tiraf, which is really strange because we don't have the concept of confessions in Arab and Islamic culture.
yeah, not the same way as Catholicism,
Yeah.
certainly.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot. You can tell there's some accidental Westernism here, where they have such a concept that they wrote it down and then try to find and then try to find something to match. Which
Maybe there is a good story behind it, so we'll see.
like
Mm.
if you can really impress me, you can impress a gray jungle. That's kind of sad.
Now I get why it's called the City of Elephants.
I am actually most interested in these two cities, the Cadarasto, the city most sinister, because why? And the Mahaba, the city of charity. Those are fun. I mean, the city of charity is actually really intriguing. I'd want to go visit it as a player. And who would call their own city that? Or like what outsider would call their own
Qadarastu? This is not an Arabic word that I can
No, it's
identify.
not. It's just
Again,
And,
it feels like it's from the
Charity
outside looking
is
in.
love. The one with charity, mahabba, it's love.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of is it in Hindi that it's muhabbat?
Yeah.
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 Those are Arabic words. Like there's the thing
Mhm.
about the 7 types of love, and all those words are Arabic root words, like ishq, or maybe Urdu.
Ishq.
It's a
Hub.
ishq.
Yeah.
Hub.
Or Persian as well, maybe?
Junoon. Yeah, it's like it's sort of
Gharam.
like
There's a lot of because there's been a lot of both invasions but also trade. Languages do move over as families that were once in one area settle down or marry into other families halfway across, a trade route. So there's a lot of crossover between places, just in general, as history goes on, which is why it's very weird sometimes when you see something that's set on a continent and it is very isolated, because that's not a thing that happens. Things and beliefs, religions, words, languages, they all transfer back and forth. Anyway, should we move on? Because I think if the more we look at this map, the more we're going to be here for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
I think this episode's just 1 page, 2 pages.
But I mean, the next one is a big one.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
We have half an hour, and so this
is half an hour enough for us to tackle the next one, or should we spend this half an hour just going through the map?
That's a good question.
I mean, there's another sort of section of text just before we get to the next section, so maybe we could go through that.
Yeah, we should go through
But the next section is very like heavy and probably deserves like a lot of space.
Perhaps we'll save the H word. Yeah. The H word could be saved for the next one, and we can, like Izza said, do the first 2 paragraphs on page 14.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe we'll just come back to the map and have fun with it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, I want to. We've talked about this a little bit. How important geography is, because again, you think of maps as somehow objective, but no, geography is very deeply a mechanism for the way Orientalism works, to the point where, as I said, Edward Said made the first chapter of his seminal work, Orientalism, about geography. And so I think that other than the fact that it's all a mishmash and the specific things that we've picked out here, there's also sort of there's the sense of, as you pointed out, how does sort of the trade, or how do the lives of these people work, right? That isn't really kind of pointed out very much here. Like it seems like because there's a lot of desert, like is it mostly sort of what is their diet like, for example, considering the limitations?
Yeah, there was a small paragraph to do with farming in the last we talked about it in the last session.
Yep.
But they basically said, in brief summary, because I can't remember the exact wording of it, there is a bit of farming, but basically all their farms are like really small and shit. Basically was like how they described it, as like the land here isn't good for farming and these people don't make good farmers. So if that's the case, then where are they getting their food from?
I can tell you something about the Badia people. They're gonna eat anything.
Mm-hmm.
Snakes, scorpions, goats, sheep, whatever they can get their hands on, they will eat it. There's no right or wrong in this.
But yeah, it just seems as though
that's the nature of the harsh life of the desert.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It just seems as though, and I think it's reflected in the geography, like you say, there's not a whole lot of care put in so far as to like the inner workings of how this culture works and operates on a personal level. It all seems to be from the outside looking in, and a lot of it places judgments upon it as well. And yeah, in the geography as well, like you say, there's no sort of paths or roads delineated. I know that's not necessarily a thing you usually put on a map like this, but it feels like in a D&D setting, maybe you would, because those are the paths that the travelers would take as well. Like the party, I mean. It's just sort of vast desert, a few cities, and then there's some green bits at the tips. Like,
it also like the ones that the cities that whose names we don't know because they're not derived from Arabic, they're kind of all over the map. They're not they're not in one place, which indicates they don't come from a singular culture, right? But also some of them are very insular. Like Afiel is on one side of I don't know how to pronounce that, the City of Confessions, or the City Most Sinister, and like Mohabba is on the other side. So how does that physically happen, right? This is what happens when you create cultures backwards like this. You can fall into easy traps, like accidentally putting the wrong thing in the wrong place, or finding saying the entire trade is built upon, I don't know, rice or something, and then having them be completely disconnected from the rest of the world. How does that trade route happen? And these questions are not necessarily brought up in a game, but when they are addressed in the game, they can provide even more avenues for storytelling. They can provide more intriguing plot points to consider. Because sometimes, you're going to have a player saying, well, I don't really want to go to Mahabba, but what's in there? And if you had answers to that built just by having the cities around it follow some sort of theme, you could have an easier answer. Like, it's hard to explain, but there is a mistake here when you say, I want a city of questing, put it into a search engine or put it into looking through an encyclopedia or look through a translation and find Talab and say, okay, I'm going to put it there. There needs to be more care when you're doing something like this, even if you're not including consultants, which you should. But in general, like, it's not a well-made map.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm gonna go back to this and see if we can kind of analyze it as a game product, and to whatever degree that we've learned a lot more about game design in the last 30 years since this was made. But there is something that Robin Laws likes to say, which is every single thing in your game is a story hook. So one of the things that I noticed when we were talking about the Haunted Lands was we were all like, oh, this actually that's a story hook, is what that is. That's cool. There's aspects there that I feel like if I was running this game, which I don't know about you, but I would never run this game. I would, that's actually the place that has the story hooks. There's ways of describing the things that we've already, as we pointed out, the map key as having like story hooks, right? For example, Hial's Sultana is a crafty, scheming woman. Well, okay, that's one thing, but it could be she's fiercely protective of her people, but to outsiders, you have to be very careful when you navigate the thing. That's a story hook. That's not just like, nothing, I guess.
So,
and it also, sorry.
Oh, I just noticed something that I don't know whether, like, this is what I think of the word. So Halwa, the city of solitude, is right next to a desert, and Halwa is a dessert.
Actually, it's Khalwa, meaning solitude.
Okay,
but
cool. I was wondering if
I need to make like one video just me reading all the Arabic the Arabic things, not the non-Arabic things.
I mean, to be fair,
Khadib, Huzuz.
Just something I wanted to circle back to what you were saying about sort of this alternative description of that female leader. Also, the suggestion you made characterizes her in a way from the perspective of her own culture and her own people and herself, not just an outsider looking in at her, which I said, like, that is not a description that she would have of herself, or that probably that her city would have of her. Like, it like characterizes them from the culture outwards rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, so Hial is located in the center of this peninsula, the center of the continent, which means that she probably has control over a lot of trade routes, which is why she can be so protective and insular, which is why she can be, why she has to be smarter, because she's dealing with a lot of other people, all of whom want something from her. But
she has a lot of power in that location.
Yeah, that, like, if in the description it had said, instead of what it did, that Hial City of Intrigue, probably a different name, but whatever, located farther inland along the north-south trading routes, Hial controls almost all trade as it passes through its borders. It once grew out of a swamp and still retains some sort of the structure. I could phrase it better, but I'm doing this like out of improv.
Yeah.
Within its rooms, pacts are made and broken. Get rid of the word dark. Hial Sultana is protective and intelligent and always wants the best for her people. And fun fact, when I said that sort of puts you into your mind that she is crafty. But I didn't use the word crafty or scheming.
Yeah, or like saying, a master of tact and diplomacy.
Yeah.
Right? That's a positive way to put the same kind of notion.
Just because words are synonyms doesn't mean that they both hold the same amount of power.
Oh, absolutely. And especially when you're thinking about the thing we pointed out about those terms being very gendered. Crafty and scheming are have a sort of, you know, morality proposed upon them and are words that are commonly used in like a derogatory way and are gendered. And those words that you just used don't necessarily have that baggage attached to them.
Yeah, and I'm going to sort of jump in here with a little bit of context where, especially in the wake of the OPEC crisis after the 70s, a lot of people were looking at the Middle Eastern sort of countries as crafty and backstabbing and traitorous and scheming. Like these this was ripped from the headlines at the time when they were making, or like would have been about a decade earlier. I mean, this stuff goes deeper than just like, I'm not necessarily saying that this author has those views or anything like that, but that was very much in the culture. Like I've gone back and watched some of the news, the way the news was covering this kind of stuff. Or, you just take Henry Kissinger, right? Who, after the Saudis nationalized the oil fields, said, I can't believe that the entirety of human, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something like, I can't believe that human civilization is being hamstrung by a bunch of savages, right? Like, this was a very, like, the way about talking about this is historically and analogous to what was going on around that time. As well. It's the way that they're using this terminology is very much of the history, and that's, I think, why it's harmful, because you can't just take it out of that history and say, well, no, we neutrally meant it, that the Sultan is like just completely given up on actually ruling his kingdom or whatever.
Yeah, you're right. Crafty and scheming definitely have like a racialized component to them, as well as that gendered component to them as well.
It holds both, right?
Absolutely.
Especially like as when we're focusing on the grand aspect of one nation, you can consider it crafty and scheming. But then when you focus on the men, you can say they're brutish and cruel. And then when you focus on the women, the two genders, men and men. And when you focus on the women, you can say they're manipulative and intelligent, right? You can have, it's the way the Romans used to treat Egypt back in the day, and the way, if you read Antony and Cleopatra, the play by Shakespeare, still contains these connotations, where Egypt is very much defined by the feminine perspective, and his thoughts and the Romans' thoughts about femininity and how that leads to a certain amount of leadership, despite the fact that she shared her position as pharaoh with her brother. So it's both in my mind. Like, you're seeing racial tensions here and you're seeing gendered tensions here. And it's very hard not to see that as somewhat intentional.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And even if it's not like outright intentional, I do believe that the sort of unconscious bias was there, for sure.
Yep. Do we want to read the first two paragraphs as a bit of a teaser cliffhanger for the next, I guess, all honor episode?
Sure.
Well, it's before that.
Sorry? It is before that, but it touches on honor as well.
I think it's just sort of like the conclusion of the previous one leading into the next one.
Okay. Well, so I guess I will read it, and then we will close off for today and pick this back up in 4 weeks.
If I may, before we move on, my apologies.
No, please.
Because like that, the previous page was a month ago. Maybe we should mention that the previous paragraphs had to do with differences in lifestyle between the Al-Badi and the Al-Hadar, and they believe a man and a woman should be judged on their own merit, not by the construction of their house, at least in principle. A person's ability and strength of a character outweigh any other distinction, and that goes on. Sorry.
Oh, yes, thank you. Sorry. Actually, I did forget. I thought that those first two paragraphs on the page with honor in it was like a prelude to that. My apologies. Because we spent so long on the map, I forgot that there was another page before. It
is a bit of a prelude, to be honest.
Shall I read it? Because I have a sense that everybody else has thoughts on it, potentially.
I'd love to read it.
Please. I don't think
Who knows? This may be my last chance ever. Is a seafaring princess whose ship is her home in Al-Hadar, is a handsome adventurer who occasionally sleeps beneath the stars in Al-Badia. Such people defy such rigid classification, but to a Sakhadan, the questions are trivial anyway. In turn, they would ask, is she an honorable woman? Is he an honorable man? If the answer is yes, each group would readily embrace either character as one of their own. In their hearts and minds, all Zaharans have more similarities than disparities. They share a common language, Medani, and a common culture that transcends their differences. More importantly, they share an underlying code of ethics and behavior which shapes their everyday lives. Nomad or townsman, sailor or thief, prince or pauper, all understand and embrace these Zaharan themes: honor, family, hospitality, purity, and piety. These interdependent beliefs make them Zaharans. I read that as nicely as I could, but I am quite disturbed by it.
Understandably, I think. Sorry, my dog is just being so loud. Yeah, I think something that really jumps out at me, and I find it difficult because I've read ahead and like I don't want to like sort of put that on what's been written in just this paragraph. I find it interesting that they choose to put honor first, and the honor section is first after this, before family, before hospitality. This is the section that they've decided is most important to show first, very early on in the book. Yeah.
I'm going to jump in with something else. I mean, I understand to some degree the sort of the technical needs of a game for all the characters to speak a common language, but they really have, picked and chosen parts from so many different cultures that speak many different languages. Arabic is not the only language that is being depicted here. We've also got, Ottoman Turkic. We've got, to some degree, maybe kind of Hindi kind of stuff. They've got Persian. And, all of that is being mashed together into this Orientalist stew.
Yeah. And I don't know, considering that as well, I find this idea that, there seem to be these constant contradictions within this text where they say that all Zaharans have more similarities than disparities. But a few paragraphs ago, we were just talking about how vastly different the lifestyles of these two groups are and how they can't really reconcile with one another. And I don't know if it's like poor writing or whatever, but it feels like there's this constant contradiction in this way throughout what we've read so far.
I feel like, having watched Oriental Adventures and even a bit of L5R, it's like a thing that happens with these ethnic or exotic cultures, and I'm using those words on purpose, that they want to kind of have it both ways. They want to convey that these people think of themselves as civilized, while at the same time constantly pointing out their differences in a very haphazard manner, in a way that belies that distinction. It turns them into a nation of hypocrites.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it plays as well into some of the things we discussed earlier about how they wanted to describe the Arab world or the Middle East as, decadent and full of abundance, but also it's poor and like desolate. And they try to hold these two things, these two polar opposite stereotypes at the same time. And in a very haphazard way, do that. Throughout what we've read so far.
I mean, I want to say, inshallah, it's going to look better the further we get down. I know that I feel like that is going to be false, and every single indication of what I've read so far indicates that would be false. We talked earlier about how we're trying to treat this as respectfully as we could. Because we don't want to be sitting here and just dunking on it. Which means that when we are sitting here and pointing out its problems, we're doing so, we're trying to be careful about it. But I cannot see anything this isn't just harmful. This is slowly evolving into a thing that can turn into a weapon. And it's at this point that you have to really ask yourself, why is this still allowed? And forgive me, I know I'm bringing politics into this, but why is it still allowed to make money?
Yeah.
Thank you for putting that a lot better than I think I would have been able to, and I think you're capturing a lot of the feelings of definitely the Asians represents crew. To whatever degree we've been able to get WotC to put just a really bland disclaimer on some of this old stuff, but they're still selling it.
And yeah, they're still profiting from it. They get to pay lip service to being progressive with what I described as like less than bare minimum effort. But they still get to profit off of it, so it doesn't really matter. And no one was going to ever see that disclaimer where it was originally put. I don't know if it's been moved, but it's less than nothing in my opinion.
We opened this up with content warnings.
Mm-hmm.
Did they?
Right.
And yeah, I think we were a bit preemptive with the content warnings because we haven't quite got to where the content warnings are actually needed because we took so long over the map, but it's fine. Like we'll open up with them next time as well. But yeah, there's stuff in this book that I'm honestly just disgusted is in here in this next section.
And also, like, to reiterate something I had said at the start of the stream is, and that's based on a video that James Mendez had said about content like this, which is that no one's going to take away your fun. You can still do whatever you want. There's nobody showing up at your door, but understand that by doing stuff like this or engaging stuff like this without like understanding why this is bad or why this is whatever, you're going to lose a lot of the diversity that you could have had you been more cognizant of things like this. And it's one of those, if you don't see POC at your table, ask yourself why.
If I may be harsher, and I don't do this lightly, I don't like being harsh. Because, again, as a brown man, there is a concern of being seen as violent or even sinister, or it's just plain old evil. I've had that tossed at me. But if you are using something like this, and you are playing it a lot, and that is your introduction, you are unintentionally indoctrinating yourself into believing what's in the text.
Yes.
And there is a point at which that becomes no longer acceptable. And the best way to avoid it would be to put this in an archive that is still accessible to public view, but annotated by the people whose cultures these come from, and with content warnings in the beginning, so you don't go down this and then get horrified and have to run away. Because not only should no one be profiting from this, but no one should be educating themselves from this.
Absolutely. I was actually thinking about this because if I may get a tiny bit personal for a second, I personally grew up completely detached from my Muslim, Pakistani, Syrian, and North African side of the family. So I'm enjoying this from the perspective of like, you guys know so much more about this than me, and I get to learn a lot as well. And I was thinking about this book and thinking about how if I had picked this up when I was a kid and the bare minimum I knew about my background was you're very, very mixed race and you have family from these parts of the world as well as these other parts of the world, like this could have been my sole introduction to my own heritage, and I would have had the absolute worst introduction to my own heritage. And this probably was some people's first introduction to Middle Eastern culture, Muslim Arabic culture, and all the various meshes that are from other places within this as well. And that is deeply like troubling and hurtful to me that there is stuff in here that I'm genuinely just like, why is this even in a D&D book, like at all? And it's very damaging and full of like these horrible stereotypes. And this is only like the sections we've read so far. Like I'm sure it's going to get worse.
Yeah, we've just gotten past the map. I mean, there are 6 people. Amur's, of course, included in that. That's why I'm saying 6. There are 6 people here who, honestly, Wizards wants to pay me to go through this and annotate things along with a couple of other folks and put content warnings on things. Yes, shukran. I'll happily take the money and I will happily do this work for you. And I cannot speak for the other 5 folks, especially not Amur, considering they're not here. But I imagine that I am not alone, because at the end of the day, we do want you to represent our cultures a little bit. We do want to play stories in worlds that remind us of our mythology and our bedtime stories, just like everyone else.
Where we can see ourselves.
But they can't come from this, not without acknowledging where the harm is.
Can I interject?
Mm-hmm.
So I just pulled up the Al-Qadim page on Drive-Thru-RPG, and we were talking about, you know, the statement that they put. I feel real icky about this because the first thing I see is "Welcome to Christmas in July. In celebration, this digital title has been marked down by 25%." And then we Wizards recognize that some of the legacy content available on this website does not reflect the values of Dungeons & Dragons franchise today.
We're in the bargain bazaar.
And it's just like, this is a platinum bestseller. But like, and I don't know how much of this is Wizards or Drive-Thru, but they literally have that statement there, and it's underneath that "Christmas in July, buy Al-Qadim Arabian Adventures at a discount," but also, we don't stand by it.
I mean, it's emblematic of what we were just saying, this whole thing of we get to show that we care a little bit by putting in absolutely no effort whatsoever, but still, please buy our product and give us money, please.
Yeah,
please,
really
even $1, even just $1. How about $1? 50 cents? 25 cents?
I mean, I feel shameful back when Wizards released that statement saying this was a first step, but we need more than this, because truth be told, that was not a first step. They were standing in place and lifting up their foot as if they were going to move. And, you know, many people believe that is enough. I ask you, if you are not moving, is that enough? I'm sorry for talking so much.
No, it's okay.
You're our guest. You should be talking.
Can I say a few things?
Honestly, I think that, Adam Ali, you should just be on the stream regularly, but, you know, who am I to say anything?
I just want to add a few things. Like, first of all,
Please,
regarding
closing
this, first, I want to say that about this statement they put, we don't want a statement, we need an action plan. Secondly, after the first stream, I got reached a lot of people telling me stories and explaining the culture and what was happening during the time of creation of these books, which I personally understand, but this is not the topic that we're discussing. We're discussing what is written and how to make it better and why is it wrong. We're not talking about the politics at the time or why they did this and what was in the previous generation. Oh, they had women were under, they had less stats than men, so they had to mention they are equal now. This is not our discussion here. The discussion right now is this is the product that we have today and still out there, and so many people are using it. This is what's wrong with it. This is what should be improved, and this is what should be removed.
Mm-hmm.
And a product of their times is not a good excuse, because I'm pretty sure if we start getting into that argument, there's going to be a lot of things pointing out differently. But like I said, that's not the argument, and I agree with you. And yeah.
I'm going to sort of, sorry, do you want to go ahead, Isa, and sort of a closing statement?
Still sort of gathering my thoughts.
Okay, I mean, I'm going to take this opportunity, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Jump in. I don't mean to cut you off.
No,
so, I mean, I'm going to sort of come at it from a slightly different perspective now that we are talking about WotC, and we are running a little long, but which is there are simple rules to crisis communication, right? So coming at it from sort of a PR perspective, one of them is the top person needs to address the issue. If there's an issue and like it blows up, and this has blown up for WotC, and I don't know what the hell their PR people are doing right now, because what they should do is they should have the top person address the issue, not put out a warmed over diversity statement. You want to have whoever runs things to be like, we understand. And then this is number two, and this is crucial, and this is not how to deal with the WotC situation. This is a rule I picked up from Professor Scott Galloway, who is one of the foremost business professors in the US. He's at NYU. And so this is about any kind of crisis that an organization faces. So I'm not sort of picking and choosing just to be like, this is how they should respond to us. I'm saying you could do this better because here's a tip from Crisis PR, WotC, with Hasbro money. The top person needs to address this issue, and you need to overcorrect. that's like warmed over, diversity statements isn't going to please anybody. It doesn't please the people who are saying, well, free speech and you should keep producing this, because they're still going to be mad at you for having put the diversity statement there, or sorry, for the disclaimer there. And those of us who actually feel this is really, really harmful, that's just insulting. That's just, you're not even doing anything. So this is really, it's one of those situations where you try to play both sides and end up being hated by both. Like, this is a situation where I agree that like from a PR perspective, if I was advising WotC, not just on this, but on any issue, it's overcorrect. And in this case, it would be stop selling it, put it up as an archive, because it is a part of the history. So keep making it available, right? Those of us who do look at it and do critical analysis of it, or historians of TTRPGs, and of course of representation TTRPGs, need to have a document like this around to be able to discuss it, to be able to analyze it, and to be able to write about it and share our thoughts about it. But you don't have to sell it anymore. Anyway, that's my thought. Isa, please.
Yeah, I mean, one of my main thoughts, and I said this to Daniel about Oriental Adventures as well, is that Wizards of the Coast should not, unequivocally, they should not be profiting from this book. They should not be profiting from Oriental Adventures anymore. If they really want to show that they are willing and want to make changes, that is one step they can take that would actually show they care, that they are no longer profiting off of something that is completely openly Orientalist and racist. But also thinking more in terms of like moving forwards, like everything you've all said, I pretty much agree with. But I also think that something that needs to happen is there need to be more voices of people of color within that space. They need to be allowed to create the work they want to create, but it's not enough to just have them there, like to hire them and have them there. They also need to be actively supported and sort of allowed to thrive within that environment and not treated like an other constantly, not, microaggressed and everything. And then when they speak up about it, they are punished for it. Sorry, I get very emotional thinking about this, so I'm just like struggling to come up with the words. Basically, like, it's not enough to have people of color present. You also have to actively support their inclusion because there is such a deficit.
And foster that culture.
There's a culture change that needs to be done at Wizards. It's just a fact. And the sooner they get started, the sooner we'll be in a place where these conversations can have a much more delightful tone as we talk about the past. But that's not the day.
Certainly not. Well, on that note, we should sign off. Mariam, would you like to close off with your how people can get in touch with you, what you're working on, any plugs you want to make?
Sure, yeah. So you can find me on Twitter at media_junkie. I am the GM and creator of the Musafirs podcast. I'm also on Prism Pals as a new cast member, and I am also currently a co-founder of Utopia TV, which is also on Twitch, and we recently got affiliates. So, yay!
Congratulations!
Cool. Thank you.
Well, them. Emmett, please.
I'm Ahmed. You can find me on Twitter at 20 Arabia RPG. I translate TTRPGs into Arabic, and I try to bridge gaps between Arabs and Westerners and other cultures, and trying to explain our culture to them, and as well create communities for Arabs to find each other and play tabletop RPGs.
Also, you share really interesting general, like, cool history bits and folklore. It's absolutely fascinating. Everybody should follow Ahmed as well. Isa, please.
Yeah, I'm Isa. You can find me at Evil Clever Dog on Twitter and Instagram. I'm a cosplayer and a set and costume designer, and my Instagram is like mostly cosplay stuff. So if you're interested in that, like, it's way easier to find on there, but I also post it on Twitter. And you can also find me playing on Monday evenings on, I am now officially permanently a part of the No Initiative TV crew playing. Right now we're playing Wildmount, a series called Wildmount Daring and Divine, which is a 5e campaign, but this Monday will be our last session of that, and then next season we are moving on to a different game. We're going to be playing Quest, and that campaign is going to be called Quest the Soaring City. So we play on Chromatic Chimera's Twitch channel on Monday evenings. It's 11 p.m. my time, 6:30 p.m. US, I think. So yeah, come check it out. It's really, really, really fun. It's our season finale next week. And Finn, will you please be quiet? Yeah, season finale on Monday. And then on August 10th, we are starting our Quest campaign. Finn, be quiet. It's trying to upstage me.
That's the
And we
campaign
can see
name.
pictures of the pupper on your Twitter, right?
Lots of pictures of the papa, who's really annoying me. Right there he is. He's real fluffy. I think he's barking because he can't jump up on the bed, but he can totally jump up on the bed himself. He just wants attention. He wants me to pick him up.
That is like my new puppy. Whenever he sees the stairs, he's like, "I could do this." No,
I want you to do it for me because I want attention.
My name is Adam Ali. I am a community manager here in Toronto, so I make safe spaces to help encourage people to game in a place that is not directly harmful. I'm also a I'm also a convention administrator of Breakout Con, which will be happening March 19th to the 21st, 2021, inshallah. And you can find me on Twitter or really any social media at WerewolfFeels. And as for what's coming up next, well, honestly, who knows? You might find me in Utopia sometime. You might find me here sometime. I'm really, I like to spread around. Thank you for having me, folks.
Thank you so much for joining. My name is Amar. I have been facilitating this. You can find me on Twitter at Amar Ijaz. I'm one of the hosts of Asians Represent the podcast. I'm also one of the cast members of Dungeons and Asians, which we just did our first Twitch live stream on Wednesday. And I've also switched from D&D to Quest, so you can follow me to get updates on that. I'm also an aspiring game designer working on a currently secret project. I also want to give a shout out to the occasional voice of God. Daniel Kwan has been producing this. Daniel, do you want to jump in quick? Or should we just give you a big shout out? Thank you so much for producing this.
What's up? In 4 hours, our Session 0 Redux for Dungeons and Asians will premiere on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AZNSRep. So yeah, check that out. We have converted our D&D characters to Quest, added some custom stuff, and all did it in this like cool little CRM that I built.
Sweet. Thank you so much to everybody for joining. Your perspectives have been absolutely enlightening. I've learned so much. Thank you so much to Daniel for producing this, and thank you for watching this and coming at this and listen. Getting a sense of, again, as we've tried to do, is not just dunk on it, but also be, this is how we would do it differently. This is how we would do it better in a way that's less harmful. Join us next month. We're doing this every, I think, third Saturday of the month, if I recall correctly. So we'll see you next month for more Al-Qadim Critical Read.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.